Hello, I'm Niall Paterson and this is the Sky News Daily, and once again we are back in our Westminster studio because you may have noticed there's an awful lot of politics around. 3 by-election results which could have a very significant effect on how we view the political dynamics and, of course, on that general election, whenever it might be. The results themselves, well, if we start by looking to the north, Selby and Ainsty, a fantastic night there for Labour, taking the seat from the Conservatives with a swing of nigh on 24%. We head down to the southwest, Somerton and Frome, again another Conservative loss, this time to the Liberal Democrats with a swing of 29%. The Conservative share of the vote there, 13 points lower than its previous low point all the way back in 1997. But we need to look to one of the London seats, Uxbridge and South Ruislip, for perhaps the only glimmer of hope for the Conservatives in what seems to have been an almost uniformly bad night. That, of course, the seat formerly held by the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Now, it's a Conservative seat, but with a massively reduced majority, just less than 500 in fact, with another significant swing to Labour, almost 7%. In a moment, we will be chatting with our political editor Beth Rigby and our election analyst Dr Hannah Bunting to examine what this all means for the state of politics in the United Kingdom. But first, let's hear from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, talking pretty specifically about the one decent result he had last night in Uxbridge and South Ruislip.
Westminster's been acting like the next election's a done deal. The Labour Party's been acting like it's a done deal. The people of Uxbridge just told all of them that it's not.
As mentioned, we are back in the Westminster studio with our political editor, Beth Rigby, and our election analyst, Dr Hannah Bunting. Lovely to see you both, and so much to talk about. But can we start, guys, with that which we just heard from Rishi Sunak? I mean, Beth, no matter how you spin this, last night was a set of disastrous results for the Conservative Party, this close to a general election.
Yeah, I mean, look, the way I characterise it, Neil, is, for a start, 2-1 is better than 3-0 for a Prime Minister. But in terms of what the other 2 seats showed, all this is doing is reinforcing the idea that they are going to be losing at the next general election. The way I liken to it, it's like Uxbridge was like a little life jacket that he could put on, you know, in the wash-up of these results, but it doesn't signal that he's not going to go under come a general election for sure. In terms of how he span it about it's not over, I'm going to double down, I think internally what's going on in the Conservative Party is there's an acceptance that they are in, to quote one former cabinet minister to me this week, the death throes, and that they can't really change the leader again. So in a way,
please don't tempt fate.
Yeah, but in a way, for Sunak, what that means is, even if this is really bad, he's not under immediate threat, and what we might see, I guess, is more agitation for him to switch it up and change it. I think what we should look for is a sort of big reset in September in which they come back and then they kind of get gunning for a general election. But I have to say, it's doom and gloom within the Conservative Party, but it would have felt a lot worse had they also lost Uxbridge.
Hannah, I mean, if the best thing that Rishi Sunak can take away from last night is that his own position is secure, for the time being at least, it's not a good night.
Yeah, I'm not really sure what he means by double down. Does that mean we're going to get 10 pledges now after the recess? God, no. But, I mean, if you are Rishi Sunak, you don't really have much of a choice but to try and make as much as you possibly can out of any win or anything that could be perceived a win, because there's just so much negative press at the moment and they have to search so hard for anything positive. But yeah, to say, oh, well, we didn't lose this and we didn't lose it by sort of 1 percentage point in a swing, it's not really the success that he wants to be painting at this point in the Parliament, going into that recess and not too far away from a general election.
Well, let's try and work out exactly what we can learn from each of these 3 seats, because by merit of where they are in the country, the demographics of the seats and so on, I do think we can learn quite a lot. So let's start in the north with Selby and Ainsty. Hannah, I mean, just in terms of the pure numbers of all of this, I mean, it's a massive result for Labour, perhaps their biggest swing that we've seen this side of the Second World War?
In terms of the numerical votes, it's the biggest the Labour Party have ever achieved. If we look at the percentage swing, then it goes into second place. It's only been beat once, and it actually knocks Tony Blair in 1996, so who was at second place, knocks that down to third place, and that April 1996 is roughly the same distance away from the 97 general election that we are from our next general election.
For both the respective winning parties, Labour and Lib Dems, they can look back to the 92 to 97 Parliament, the one before the big Blair change, and go, the patterns happening there are being repeated in these by-elections. So for the Lib Dems, they've won 4 in a row. They hadn't done that since 92 under Paddy Ashdown. And for Labour, these are Blair-like swings. And if you look at Selby, it's the Conservatives' 249th most vulnerable seat. So if Labour can take that, yes, it's a by-election, but who's to argue then they can't gain 124 to win a Westminster majority? And what does that mean for the Conservative MPs? Can you just imagine viscerally, if you're a Conservative MP going, they've done what? They've taken Selby. That's rural Conservative heartlands. Yeah, the Lib Dems sometimes rough us up in those rural seats in the Tory heartlands, where they're Lib Dem Conservative battlegrounds, but it's normally Labour in the red wall in metropolitan areas. And now they're going rural. So it's going to make a lot of Conservative MPs extremely, extremely nervous.
Given all of that, little surprise that Keir Starmer, dressed all in black like some evil man from Del Monte, got on the train
his
with...
Friday look, Neil,
It's
dressed
really,
down Friday.
It's not my favourite look. Well, he and Angela Rayner were up there flanking the new MP, Keir Mather, as you would expect. Let's just have a quick listen to some of what Sir Keir was saying.
Last night, many people put their trust in the Labour Party, and we know as we go forward that we must continue to earn the trust and to deliver, if we get the chance in a Labour government, on the very many aspirations of people in this constituency.
Look, I don't think we can talk about Selby without talking about the winning candidate, as Conservative MP Johnny Mercer referred to as one of the in-betweeners, the new baby of the House, Keir Mather. I mean, I have to admit, I'm not entirely certain from a Conservative perspective that slagging off the incoming MP because of his age works. I mean, he won the seat, Hannah.
Yeah, it seems like a particularly low blow. If all you've got to say about him is he's too young, then that isn't a particularly strong argument, because I think I read earlier that Tony Blair and William Hague were both babies of the House at one point when they started their career. So that doesn't really mean anything. And as Labour have been saying, the people voted for him. So if that's the only criticism that the Conservatives or Johnny Mercer could come up with, then I don't think that's going to fly with voters very well.
But as you were saying, Beth, I mean, if Labour can win in Selby, I think Keir Mather himself may well have said this, they are rewriting the rules on where Labour can win. I mean, if you're a Conservative MP with a majority of anything less than 15,000, you're probably concerned.
If Selby happened in a general election, there are seats that would have been Tory for a century, places like Aylesbury, Macclesfield, Basingstoke that would go Labour. And it's the same for places like Dover that haven't been Labour since Tony Blair won. So what this does give Starmer, not that he's using it now, maybe he's got an eye on not gaining Uxbridge, but he's in Blair territory. I mean, what does he need? Blair had a swing of, 10.7%, was it?
Yeah. And
in 97.
He needs 12. He needs to get 124 seats.
He needs a 12-point swing. After the locals, everyone's like, "Oh, okay, you look like you're going to become the largest party." This by-election suggests that they are tracking where the national polls are tracking. It's one by-election and you have to put all the caveats in. But you can't help but think that they are going to be feeling more confident about it. Actually, I mean, these aren't my words. This is from a very senior advisor to him. We were talking about it. If I can find it, it's on my face.
Beth Rigby is currently looking at her phone, at her WhatsApp messages.
Did I try and rein it back while you find the WhatsApp?
No, I found it because I said, "Oh, it's not. This isn't a clean narrative for you because of for Uxbridge." And this person said, "It may not be clean, but it's crystal clear." And they went on to say, "Selby shows how far we've come, the potential of what we're capable of. winning the trust of voters who've never voted for us in a strong part of the country, a Tory party, is remarkable. But they went on to say Uxbridge shows support from voters is conditional, and if we don't act in their interests, we will not support us. And I think what Labour will do now, in a way, is they can use Uxbridge to kind of try and keep the party focused.
We'll come on to that in just a second, because I do think we need to focus on Somerset and Frome as well. The Lib Dems, once again, with their diamond-shaped signs declaring that they are winning there, and winning there famously, Hannah, a swing to the Lib Dems, basically 30%.
Yeah, which is nearly double what they needed to win the seat. So, they were going above and beyond the sort of bare minimum of what they needed. And yeah, it's just testament to their excellent campaigning, and probably a case of Labour backing off and concentrating their campaigning where they knew that they had a better chance of winning. But also, it does follow that trend that the West Country, which has a Liberal tradition, is going back to the Liberal Democrats. They are going back to pre-2015 levels of success there.
As sure as night follows day, a cheesy stunt generally tends to follow the Liberal Democrats doing well in a kind of a mid-term by-election. And so it proved today, Sir Ed Davey, bringing his cannon to get these clowns out of number 10. Let's just have a little flavour of, I bet everyone knows exactly what Ed Davey is about to say, because we've heard it before, but let's just have a listen again.
They're fed up of these Conservative clowns in their political circus not helping people. And that's why thousands of lifelong Conservatives are switching to the Liberal Democrats. Why thousands of lifelong Labour voters have lent us their support to beat the Conservatives. And I think it's why people from all backgrounds, all walks of life, are turning to the Liberal Democrats. They see that we're listening to them and we're fighting for a fair deal for them.
I mean, usually at this point, Beth, I would be saying, look, Lib Dems often pick up seats in by-elections and then they go straight back to the former incumbent at the general election with a swing of, the best part of 30%. I'm not sure that applies in these circumstances.
No, and when you talk to the kind of the top team around Davey, what they say and what they point to, and this is what Hannah's picking up on, is that this isn't just a one-off ballot. This is sustained. So this is 4 in a row with huge swings. And what we're talking about, certainly with some of those by-elections, they are in the West Country, particularly in the southwest, where when you used to look at that map, it was mainly yellow, and then they suffered the Osborne Cameron, submarine wipeout in which they literally got cut off, didn't they, by their knees by the Conservatives in the 2015 election. It was like near wipeout, and what you're seeing now is 8-9 years later, how they're beginning to rebuild. And for the Conservatives, this pincer movement of the Lib Dems beginning to pick up their old battlegrounds and Labour coming at them in some of these traditional Tory areas, it's like it's the perfect storm of a perfect nightmare for the Conservatives.
Look, guys, let's just pause just for a second, because after the break, we will be focusing on that Uxbridge and South Ruislip seat. We'll be talking about ULEZ, Sadiq Khan. We'll be talking about the mayoral, the general elections, and I'll be introducing you to the concept of the blue donut. That's after this. Okay, I'm still in the studio with Beth Rigby and Dr Hannah Bunting, and we now must turn our attention to, the one glimmer of hope that there was for the Prime Minister, indeed for the Conservatives. Uxbridge and South Ruislip. The Conservatives held on to it with a 495 majority. And Hannah, it strikes me that that's probably down significantly from where they were when Boris Johnson won the seat.
I think there's a couple of really interesting things just about the numerical side of the vote. The Green Party got 800 and something votes, so that is obviously more than the gap between Labour and the Conservatives. So it might have been closer than we think if we're talking about support for just the main parties, if there weren't alternatives on offer. And also there were 17 candidates, and the Conservative candidate was at the bottom of the ballot paper. So people would have actually had to really look, and they knew who they were going in and voting for beforehand. Because we know that some people do just decide on the day when they've got the ballot paper in front of them, and they wouldn't have gone all the way to the bottom to tick that Conservative candidate.
I mean, Beth, I find this seat fascinating because, of course, that there is the overarching local issue. ULEZ, the ultra-low emission zone that the Labour mayor here here in London, Sadiq Khan, has expanded, in essence, to cover everything within the M25. So on the one hand, you have those who are opposed to this environmental policy, meaning that Conservatives hold on to the seat. However, it was the 900-odd Green votes that stopped Labour from taking the seat. What do you make of it?
Well, look, I was actually in Uxbridge last week, and I talked to voters, and actually other issues came up as well as EULA's. But look, it was weaponised in a very, very effective way by the Conservatives. It's obviously extremely evocative, this issue, because it's essentially saying to people, if your car isn't green enough, you've got to pay £12.50 every time you get in it and drive, in a part of the country not like in London, where I can get a bus or my bike, or, I can get the tube. But in places where it's very hard to access public transport, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, you can see why people are going to fire off a protest vote against that, if you like. And I think the interesting thing about all of this is when the mayoral election comes up next year, in a general election in outer London, which is, Neil, what do you call it? Come on.
The Blue Donut.
I made him do that because he hates it.
I absolutely hate it. I can't stand it. But in essence, explain the concept. Basically, you've got kind of a Labour heartland in the middle of London,
and then
you
you've
get Tories
got a
all the way
ring,
around.
and then you've got a blue donut ring, where outer London, the suburbs of London.
So Labour's the jam filling, is it?
Labour is the red jam of central London. Haven't got a hope in hell if you're a Tory councillor or a candidate in most of those seats. But then what changes is the donut, the blue, delicious donut, Neil. And so actually this is, in a general election, it's quite interesting now, because some of those seats that are very contested, does this policy win them back for the Conservatives? What do you think? I mean, I didn't think, EULA's is going to become this election-defining issue.
No, I didn't either. But I saw, as soon as the candidates were announced, two of them had either anti-EULA's or no EULA's in their name. And I think it helped with this campaign because the EULA's issue existed before the by-election was called. Again, we do have to be a little bit careful because we don't know exactly if that's why people voted Conservative instead of Labour. The swing was in Labour's direction, 6.7 points. It just wasn't quite enough for them to take that seat.
And actually, even in 2022 locals, when all of London was going historically badly for the Conservatives, they managed to hold on to Hillingdon and even improve their shares there. So, I guess Labour want to go, this is definitely all about EULA's. There might be something else going on. And this is what I mean for politically for Sunak. If he can just leverage this and say, well, we can fight on issues, or we can dig in areas where we can see them off, and we can put doubt into voters' minds about Labour effectiveness or Labour policies, that's why I guess he thinks it's not game over, or he can at least argue it.
Well, let's find out what the Mayor of London, the Labour Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, thought was going on there.
I've lived in London my entire life. This seat's never been Labour since I've been alive, including in 1997 during the Tony Blair landslide and the subsequent by-election. I'm quite clear, though. The policy to expand the ultra-low emission zone is the right one. It was a difficult decision to take. But just like nobody would accept drinking dirty water, why accept dirty air?
And I suppose, and you may well disagree with me on this one, Beth, the question is, when it comes to a general election, if the Tories are going to try and weaponise this, or weaponise the EULA's policy, whether it is seen as a, in inverted commas, Labour policy or a Sadiq Khan policy.
Yeah, I think the thing with that, though, is, and as was demonstrated in Uxbridge, is that people don't differentiate in that way. It's a Labour mayor that's implemented a policy that they don't like, and therefore they're not going to vote for the other guy that wants to be a Labour Prime Minister. I think Labour are going to have to think very carefully about how they frame this policy. The Labour Party are, and also the London Mayor is.
Let's turn our attention then to that general election. And Hannah, every time I do one of these podcasts, talking in the aftermath of by-elections or local election results, you can always say, oh, do you know what? You can't extrapolate directly from what happened last night to what happens at a general election. And then we go on to extrapolate what might happen at a general election from what happened last night.
We shouldn't do that. Should we just not do this podcast? Should we cancel it?
We're 20 minutes in already, Beth, so I'm afraid not. Do you know what? I'm finishing it off.
Okay, let's just go.
What did we learn about what may well happen at the next election?
Yeah, you are completely right that especially when you just take one or even three on the same night, it is very difficult and a little bit dangerous sometimes to try and say, well, now we can predict the future. We've got our magic 8 ball.
But
when we take these results in with the other by-election results that we've had in this parliament, and we take it with local election results, and we really start to build up a lot more votes, we can start to see that when governments are doing worse and at greater frequencies, we know that that usually means they're not going to have success at the next general election. And that is what we're seeing in the elections that we're having now. And so that makes it more likely.
Still, I mean, Beth, in terms of expectation management, the thing that I just can't quite get my head around is why Labour didn't challenge the Conservative assertion more strongly that the Tories were on track to lose all three. I mean, there was always a chance. There was always a chance it wouldn't go that way. And we had Angela Rayner, the deputy, saying this morning that, Uxbridge was always going to be a stretch. Well, if that was the case, then you should have said it before the election.
Look, as polls close, and I do what I normally do, which is I tap everyone up and I try to go to people that I don't think are going to spin me. My sources in Labour said Uxbridge is looking good. I mean, they thought they were going to edge it, right? And actually, they were more nervous about Selby, but they certainly didn't redeploy people from Uxbridge to Selby in the final days of this campaign. So on the ground, they were not kind of assuming that they were going to take Uxbridge. But I think you're right in that in terms of expectation management, the Conservatives were smarter in the way. I mean, we went to an event the other night and, those around Rishi Sunak were saying to me, we've lost all three. It's absolutely a done deal. We're going to lose all three. But the point is that holding on to one, it kind of changes the narrative, because whether you lose by 495 or you win by 495, you've kept the seat, right? So I do think that, if you were the sort of Labour internal spinners, you might have a look at that and think, how could we have reframed it? But I think actually what Uxbridge shouldn't do, right, is take away from Selby and a record-breaking overturning of a 20,000 Tory majority, which is genuinely historical.
Well, that's what I'm going to say. I mean, are we seeing that kind of rather more traditional kind of electoral map that we've come to expect? I mean, radically shifting, parts of London going blue that perhaps never have, parts of the north going red again in a way in which we've not quite seen.
Yeah, I mean, I was always sceptical about the realignment and how stable that was going to be and whether it really was a realignment that we saw. And I think we are probably still moving on those tectonic plates and it hasn't quite settled yet.
Hannah, one thing that I was talking to a strategist about the other day was their argument was voters are really fickle these days and they're really transactional. And actually, we all talked about, it's the realignment of British politics, and then it's,
Oh, you did.
All right, let's just, I think I've deleted all those tapes, actually. There's no evidence I've said that. No, but the point is that actually what you're seeing with these by-elections is that voters are maybe more transactional and that they will pivot. I mean, I do think there was a cultural realignment, wasn't there, or an interesting moment in the 2019 general election, which you saw some of in the 2017 general election, of a cultural sort of alignment between these two quite different voter tribes coalescing around the Conservative brand. But fundamentally, economically, these two different groups of people want very different things, right? So it's hard to keep that coalition intact, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. There's two big challenges for the Conservative Party. I mean, first, voters, they don't have the same party identity strength that they used to have. People used to say, I'm Labour, I'm Tory, and it was part of their identity. We don't really have that as strongly anymore. But the second thing is that coalition that the Conservatives managed to win in terms of the voters last time was always going to be really, really difficult to hold on to.
100%.
You have got two groups of people who are completely different. And it seems at the moment that the newer Conservative voters, so those ones who we used to think of as Labour voters demographically and where they come from, they're actually not deserting the Conservatives at the same rate as the people that we used to think of as typical Conservatives. And that's a really, really big problem for Rishi Sunak and the Conservative strategy, because who do you prioritise? Who are your policies for? Because it's really, really difficult to do them for everybody.
Certainly is. Do you know what, guys? We're going to call it a day. Largely because, Hannah, you need to get to your bed after about 32 hours up. Beth, you need to get home and pack your bags ahead of your massive holiday.
Massive holiday.
which you're not at all looking forward to. Hannah, Beth, it's been lovely to speak to you again, and I'm sure we will pick it up again in the future. And that is your lot for today's edition of The Daily, and indeed for The Daily this week. We will be back on Monday. We'll see you then.